So this is a panel that's by title talking about adoption. And I think really what we're trying to talk about here is the how to take advantage of all the hard work over many years for enablement and translate that into adoption, right? So there's a difference between enabling something and actually having something adopted and used. There were a lot of colorful analogies in that last panel that we just heard. And the one that comes to my mind, good or bad, is the movie War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise. Has anybody seen that? Where suddenly all the pods are in place all over, but it's only when, I mean, that's the enablement part, right? All the pods are already there, but it's only when they sort of zap the creatures into the pods that they come to life and start to do things. Well, that's the enablement piece that I'm trying to talk about by analogy. Was that pretty bad? That's pretty bad. I apologize. Not all right. So, I do have one slide I thought I would share from my own research. Just a single slide, not like my friend Victor with a lot here, but you can see it there. I've been in this role for a few years now at Aberdeen, and we all the research that I do comes from enterprises. They respond to surveys that we do, and so one of the very first ones I did when I joined in 2007 was on the topic of encryption, and then we repeat these things over time. I happened to do one also in 2012. So what I thought would be interesting would be to compare 2007 data to 2012 data, a nice 5-year kind of time comparison there about where has encryption been adopted. Now, just so you understand what you're looking at here, it's called a tree map. It's just a way to present information, and it's really a fancy bar chart, I guess, if you think about it. But what I'm showing you here is all the places where I asked the question, does your organization, have you currently deployed encryption in this area? And you'll see things in the upper left there, like MFT is managed file transfer. You'll see, it might be hard to read, even for me, it says backup, and email, and file servers, and so on. So this is, when they said, yes, we have currently deployed something in that area, that would show up as a positive response. And what I'm showing you here in this tree map format, the size of the little patch there, it looks like a farmer's field if you're flying over the country. The size of the field is what percentage of organizations said, yes, we currently use it in that way. And that's for 2012. So the bigger the size, the higher, the closer to 100% of organizations said yes. Now, I will point out that that's not the same as volume. So if someone said, yes, I use encryption for extended validation SSL server certs, they could just have one, or they could have 1,000, or they could have 10,000, right? It doesn't really indicate volume in that sense. It just says the organization does or doesn't use it. So you get that. Now, the color is the other thing that's being shown here, and the color represents the growth between 2007 and 2012. So the darker green color means the higher growth there is over that 5-year period. The lighter green means a lighter growth. If it were red, it would show a shrinkage. And you will notice one thing right away. There's the entire map here is green. So in every area of encryption that I asked about between 2007 and 2012, it went up in that 5-year period. So that just says something about our need to protect data. Some of the things I'll point out, though, is where did it go up the most? Where are some of the darker green spots? And you'll see, for example, I highlighted in the red rings there, it says file folder encryption up there towards the center top. And what I found is that companies have moved away from trying to make decisions about, do I encrypt this specific file or folder based on policy? That's just hard, because you have to have users who might not care make decisions, or you try to automate that somehow through technology. Do I encrypt this or don't I? It's just easier to encrypt everything. And so you see some growth there from file folder encryption, which is still in use because the size of that field is pretty big, but the growth is low, the color is light. And where did that go to? It went to the full disk encryption, which is very green, and it went to self-encrypting drives, which really 5 years ago didn't exist, but it's the darkest green on the map, right? So there's been a shift from that specific policy, do I encrypt this or not, to I'll just encrypt everything on the endpoint, and the highest growth, in fact, in things like self-encrypting drives. So with respect to trusted computing, I would say that's a very strong sign of a trend towards a movement in the direction that we all would like to see it go. Another dark green color there is USB drives, because we all recognize that's an area of encryption. TPM is on the board. It's towards the right there on the bottom. It's modest size patch there. So in terms of percentage of organizations who said I have adopted it, at least to some extent, it's a relatively modest size. And in terms of growth, it's not the lightest green on the map, but it's not the darkest green either. So that's another example of where, according to the data we have, doing these kind of surveys, it shows that there's some modest growth, but certainly not as strong either in size or in growth rate as self-encrypting drives. And other things that we know trusted computing could be used for. We heard talk about Stephen Sprague mentioned virtual smart cards, for example. So user search is on the board there. Device authentication is on the board there. You can see relatively bigger size, relatively modest growth. Anyway, it's a good for what it's worth. It's just a good reference point that we can use just to kick off the rest of the conversation. So I'll start with that. I'll just repeat that I think what we're trying to talk here is about all the great work that's been done to enable things to happen. And then before we conclude, we'll kind of move from the enablement side to how do we turn that enablement into actually turning things on and getting them to be put into use. So that would be my goal for the panel. So maybe we could start with enablement in no particular order. I could start with you, Brian. I think you do a good job about just start us off talking about the good work that's been done on enablement and how we've sort of set the stage for good things to turn dark green in the next 5 years.
So, so TCG, I was talking from why TCG had on for a few minutes. TCG's done a great job of deploying the specifications to enable the ecosystem to build these products that have been distributed. And from a TCG perspective, it was overall mission of getting the specs adopted by the ecosystem. They've done a fantastic job in that area, in the tune of about 2 billion endpoints have shipped with TCG technology to the industry. So, kind of in the, I'm not sure I'll use your exact analogy, Derek, but
the world doesn't suit you.
More on the world side, but the pods have been in place. And they've been placed out there across the world. And so that's been a very good enablement of the market perspective. And then we started to see some interesting adoption occur across that. We'll hold on that and pause on that for a few minutes. But it's been across 3 specific technology areas. So the self-encrypting drives have shipped in volume. The TPMs have shipped in volume across the PC industry, as well as the set-top box industry, in some multifunction printers within specific geos, as well as in some other devices for access control. So TPM's been adopted in several different markets from a deployment and distribution perspective. And then the Trusted Network Connect endpoints have shipped in very high volume across the vendor gear, as far as the interfaces of what Trusted Network Connect provides to the marketplace. So that overall distribution and deployment has taken place. And I think we'll kind of shift into how are they used in a few minutes, but I think that really sets the context.
Yeah, Stacy, can you add to this part of the conversation about the enablement?
Sure. I think that...
Are there things that aren't here that we need still, or we first talk about what is, and then talk about any gaps that might still remain?
In terms of the chart as it is, I think that it represents a set of user applications, which is fine. And you're going to say to the customer, what do you use this for? I use it for VPN, I use it for email, I use it for things like that. One of the things that I think TCG has learned over the last decade is that customers are disinclined to increase their administrative costs with yet another security feature that they have to directly manage. On the other hand, customers are very willing to accept security technology that is built in, always running, never noticed. In other words, for me, it's free. It's there and it's doing the job.
I think we really need to talk about what you just said. Can you say the disinclined sentence again? They're disinclined.
They're disinclined to increase their cost structure further to add security to their environment.
I think all the research that I've done over this 6-year period would say quite the opposite. They might not want to do that,
yes.
but that's in fact exactly what they do.
Yes, okay, I agree with that.
They solve a problem at a time, because the nature of humans is I've got a problem, I want to solve it, and then I want to move on and get the business rolling ahead. So what we end up with is this patchwork of independent solutions, independently managed with all the associated costs that you're saying they're disinclined to do, but in fact that's what they end up doing.
Yeah, they pay it, but they don't want to pay it.
Yeah.
And so I think we would agree that they pay it, but they don't want to pay it. And so when going down this path a little bit further, if they can get it at little or no cost, that's much better than
So we should put a pin in this part of the conversation. Will, maybe you probably have some thoughts on this, about there's a business case potentially underneath all this patchwork that we have here. Stacy, you had some other points to make.
Yeah, so moving on down that path, one of the successes for SSL has been that it's built into the browsers that we use. So, as mentioned in the last panel, we use SSL because it makes us feel good and it's there for us, and it didn't necessarily cost us anything to get. It doesn't necessarily cost us anything to use. So, okay, that's good.
And by the way, there's a good point here. SSL is one of the lighter colors, but look at the growth to extended validation SSL, because people actually pay more for that. It gives some extra, assurance of a legitimate website, and companies have somehow made the business case that it's worth spending a little bit of extra money in order to have that higher level of confidence for their buyers or what have you. So there's some positive news, I think, in that sort of finding.
So we're seeing a little bit of motion now of TCG technology into infrastructure, and that's where I was going. The company that is currently, there are two companies that are active in this motion at this time. One is Intel Corporation. They offer a number of advanced security technologies that depend in part on the presence of TPM, for example, trusted execution technology and trusted compute pools. They both take advantage of TPMs in Intel chipsets. As a user of those technologies, you are not paying anything that you are aware of to get them. They're there for you, and you can use them if you want to.
Can we just clarify for everyone, you're able to take advantage, or you must take advantage?
It's your option.
Okay, yeah.
You can or not as you wish.
Okay.
And for Microsoft, as the other company that's making a move to put TCG technology into the infrastructure, you may be aware of Microsoft Windows 8 and how it exploits TPMs, and Microsoft Windows 8.1, which has further dependencies on the use of TPM. In these situations, if you have Windows 8, you may or may not have a TPM, you may or may not use the TPM with your Windows 8. With Windows 8.1, it's a little bit more stringent, and if you've got Windows 8.1, you're going to use a TPM with it. But in making those statements, you're not burdened with the management of that. You don't have to initialize it. You don't have to manage it. Windows will do that for you, delivering whatever the security values are that Windows derives from that TPM to you at no additional charge. You bought the operating system and you got this as one of the deliverables with it. So for me, looking at the adoption of security technology, free is good.
And the free is in multiple spots. There's the cost to acquire it. There's also the cost to manage it. And so on.
Yes, that's right. And both of those have to be as close to zero as possible for the biggest bang.
All right. Will, why don't you jump in on the same?
Yeah. So I think your diagram is very accurate in my experience with these technologies as far as the level of adoption. And I think there's two forms of acceptance criteria for what will drive acceptance criteria. There's a party that will be an authoritative figure that can decide whether or not these technologies are usable. And then there is a user community that will set a criteria of whether the technology is usable. The most dominant group, I believe, is the user community. And you're going to need acceptance from the end users, folks that have the mobile devices, the PC devices. These technologies need to be transparent to them. They do not want to be burdened by things like passwords, and we've we've heard a lot of innovation on finding out ways to make technologies transparent. And I believe the darkest boxes are the ones that have done that. Self-encrypted drives, for instance, have been able to remove their dependency from the operating system and reduce some of the problems that you would see. Either both the user is just a pain for the user to deal with, or it's so complex that it actually can cause failure in the device, which again removes the ability to be usable by the end user. The other one is the management piece, and that is another user thing. Not only do you have someone who has to see the device, but there's got to be a group that needs to manage the device. So from a usability group, you need to be transparent. And I think, as Stacy just said that. There's another side, and that's very much where I come from on the government side, where you need to establish a level of trust. That does become important, especially when your threat vectors get higher and higher. When you present a technology that you claim to be secure, and then someone defeats that erodes your accountability in this whole kind of forum. And so those are other things that can impact the adoption. If someone says, I have the most secure VPN, and someone breaks the operating system that's hosting that VPN client, you lose credibility, and again, that will affect your adoption rate. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to be able to satisfy both those groups.
And staying on the enablement part, just for now, this is just a question I had. I hope it's not sacrilegious in this group, but by the way, I'm a big proponent myself and a big fan. Hope that all this vision of trusted computing comes fully to pass. When we just heard, and you're the one who actually put it up, I think, in your infographic, the 3 feet long infographic, about how devices have overtaken humans, and there's more of them than us, and it'll be 50 billion by such and such a time. How does the math work when we have 2 billion today that we have a root of trust in, and yet we have 50 billion devices? Can we possibly, and every one of these, even when Deborah Plunkett signs her act and says you must use it in the government and so on, how long until those devices roll out there? When we drop the dye into the ocean, how long until the whole ocean turns red?
Right.
And can we ever get there? How much is enough before it starts to make a difference?
So there's a lot of questions in there in that soliloquy. So let's see. In terms of rate of diffusion, the TPM 2.0 specification makes it possible to write a TPM as software or as firmware, assuming that you can execute that software in a secure operational state. So what's that mean? Who's got a secure operational state laying around that might be useful? Well, anyone who makes an ARM, a mid-range or higher ARM processor, probably executes the trust zone elements of that architecture. Trust zone is a secure operational state in an ARM processor. There are already billions of ARM processors in deployment that have a trust zone available, which is being used. So one could imagine creating an ARM-based implementation of a TPM in firmware that would execute within the context of the trust zone secure operational state. Not only do you have something that you can roll out in new devices, but you could conceivably deploy it into fielded devices. So that is one way to accelerate the diffusion of such a thing, is to create a trust anchor that can run in a secure operational state for devices that are already out.
So some of those things are already envisioned in the 2.0
Yes, that's right.
specification. Good, excellent. Do you want to make a...
Yeah, so, there's already TPMs in mobile phones, if you're aware or not aware. So the Windows phones today, we showed them at RSA, at TCG, with Nokia, and they're shipping today a TPM in Windows Mobile, and the Windows Phone, as they call it today. And so that deployment has started across that mobile space, and today that's a smaller market. As we start to look at the activities across ARM, Trust Zone, Trust on IC, those activities are driving towards the adoption of security built into the mobile phone in the chipset. Whether it's field deployed or not, over the time frame that we look out, we know it's going to be built in. We see the writing on the wall. So do we get to the scale that we're talking about? Absolutely. as you start to look at adoption across the enterprise and the demand curve there, Stacy brought up a really good point about free security built into our devices today, which is great, and that's for the end user enjoyment of security that's built into the platform they just purchased. On the other hand, if we look at the business case, where whether it's a government or a large enterprise deploying these technologies, they really want to look at it and say, we have to manage our security because we want to know something. We want to know something like who's on my network. We want to know something like, is the content that we're protecting always persistently protected, and the access to that content being well known. And then they're doing things about data leak as well, as far as queries across the content that's out there. And so those are become very important topics of consideration for adoption of TCG technologies, because there's manageability capabilities that the enterprise really looks at and says there is a return on my investment by deploying the thing I already purchased because it's built in to my devices. I bought it, I have it for free essentially, and so now I should go manage it, and it replaces existing technology that I have at a lower cost and a higher availability level. And so that's really been the business case of transition that we've seen in enterprise to adopt TCG, whether it's the self-encrypting drives or the TPM, and kind of going back to having this great driver of operating systems push into the market. We've seen with both Windows 8 hardware requirements for the TPM, as well as the application use of things like virtual smart card and connected standby there, as well as Google Chromebook shipping with TPMs as well to protect access and certain operations of the platform going out to market. So you're seeing the adoption going in different places across different operating systems.
Did people end up with some haves and have-not situations where there'll be some benefit that it'd be so clear that people that have these capabilities will somehow be superior or end up unscathed when something bad happens? They'll be the ones left, unsullied. Yeah.
I would say that's the ultimate goal of security organizations, is to provide the best possible process and technology to prevent things from happening in the future, and then predicting what could happen and preventing those bad things from happening. But it's a moving target, as we all know, in security. Things keep changing. But having a root of trust, having a measurable boot, having a measurable state of platforms, having strong authentication to the platform itself, so you have a known user, a known device, having device attributes reporting their state up to service providers, all valuable things that we didn't have in the past. And so these become extremely high-level, high-bandwidth sets of criteria that give decisions back to service providers, organizations, governments about what they want to allow happen with those platforms. And so that set of data is extremely valuable.
So the transition now towards having all the pods in place to convincing people to turn them on and take advantage of the capabilities, we start to move into the adoption phase. So Microsoft, the software developer, has made a decision that we're going to start taking advantage of these. Google Chromebooks and certain Windows phones and so on have made a decision as a developer they're going to take advantage of those capabilities to differentiate themselves from whatever. How can we make more of a case? Will maybe you have some views on this, to take advantage of these capabilities and offer things that the market wants to buy.
Well, I actually wanted to chime in on that last one.
Go ahead.
Spreading the, dropping the die.
Go ahead.
And spread. There was a good comment Stacy made about, pushing these things in other devices like the ARM-based devices. We talked about how TPMs are shipped all over the place, but a big driver that will really allow the die to spread, the catalyst, would be, again, standards and compliance across technology vendors at the low level. There's a way to, you look at things like firmware BIOSes, a lot of those are still proprietary, and a lot of those things are kind of key elements to establishing trust. And you still need to have, you still need to open those things up. to really achieve those some sort of compliance or interoperability, so that your on-device can talk to your Windows tablet device and that your Windows OS can communicate over, a protocol that really is that uses elements that are composed of the most trusted information of the system. So that to me is a big thing that I'd like to see more out of the COTS vendors is stop hiding the most important information. I think some of them use it to really protect some of their secret sauce, but a lot of those things are important to get very useful and trustworthy levels of communication.
Well, so now you're a product manager of one of those vendors, and you have to make some decisions about the limited engineering resources you have, and you have to say to yourself, okay, I can support a certain segment of the market that has these capabilities, but I also have to support all the other installed base and whatever. And so you kind of straddle both worlds for a while. And so talk about how that works.
Absolutely. So I mean, you're right. There are a lot of worlds to straddle. Certainly, resources as far as just being able to implement these protocols and things, and to work with other organizations. That's important. There is also a proprietary element. You want to hold on to the thing that makes you valuable. And sometimes, and especially in the security world, those are the things you really do want to keep proprietary. The biggest thing that I see that helps out the most is a level of understanding where you can work with other organizations and communicate. These are the things that really compose trust, and there's a better way of building things so that the technology that we deliver is done efficiently. So, like as a product manager, instead of doing something like building an add-on to my product that might make it more complex, I can use a new architecture that allows me to do things more efficiently. And it's done in a way that can be freed up to allow other people to take advantage of that. The one thing that can be done is really better design principles, taking advantage of both things that have elements of security into them, like building things that getting lost in my thread a little bit. Being more efficient in your designing so that you can be nimble about developing, but also building platforms that are open so other vendors can take advantage of those things.
Yeah. There was Stacy, you made another comment in the previous panel about bottoms up, from the hardware or the device up, and also from the network down. That was an interesting point. And it takes me in a way back to this chart, back to our little disagreement before we worked that out. These are all individual problems that people are trying to solve. If I'm trying to solve security of data on my endpoint, then a self-encrypting drive is a really nice, neat, integrated solution to that, which is why it's it is the darkest green on the board. I'm trying to establish a secure connection of devices to my network and be able to answer questions about what they are and so on, and that's why that becomes a compelling, box somewhere on the network. But what are the other? Those are the big, the base hits, if you will, if not home runs. But how can we find more of those more quickly in order to get this wonderful enablement that we've got sort of popped into the adoption and use category?
So there are some models that are already in the marketplace for that address this kind of concern. For example, the Samsung Knox phone. There's been a significant interest on the part of the enterprise for some time in somehow or other extending corporate governance onto these things. So that creates a number of different problems. One is that right now, there's my personal data on this phone, and if my employer extends some sort of security agent in here, then there's a possibility that my personal data will now become corporate data. It will be picked up by a backup, for example, and now I can sue them. So that's a bad thing. So we can't have this subject to corporate governance and my use as it exists today. It needs to be split. It needs to have dual personality. And that's what Samsung Knox Phone does. It creates two personalities, a corporate personality and an individual personality for this device. And the way it's done in Samsung Knox is they've got virtualization. And that virtualization creates a corporate partition and a personal partition. If you go down the stack, what you find is that at the base of the stack, at least on their roadmap at this time, is a hardware root of trust. And that hardware root of trust validates the integrity of the firmware and of the hypervisor, assuring separation between my personal life and my professional life on this device. So that solves a real-world problem here. The corporation can be really iron-fisted on the corporate persona on this device, and I can run Angry Birds all day long on my personal side.
So those are the kind of things that could be the kind of grassroots power of the end user kind of demand.
Yes.
Because some of the alternatives we've talked about, I've heard of already, but we find other ways to solve problems in the meantime. And I've seen some of the use agreements that corporations have put out, brand name corporations, where they basically say, yeah, you can bring your own device, but you have to give up certain rights, like any of your data could be backed up, it could be subject to discovery, and so on and so on. And it basically is allowing you to buy a device for the corporation to use is what it translates to. And solutions like what you described could really address that. And they could lead to one of those have-not situations. Yes. If I want these freedoms and privacy of my stuff, I need to buy the devices that would allow me to have
in this case, it'd be a Samsung Knox.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the executive VP is going to want to support the iPhone. Yeah. What else can we do along these lines? I just open it up to you, Will and Brian. How do we find more applications like this that can spur us towards adoption and use?
I think we have some good progress in place already. The self-encrypting drives, even though it's a smaller box, is getting strong adoption because it has very good characteristics like auditability, ease of use, runs in the background, is unobtrusive. It allows you to log in once to the device, and it allows you access to everything you have. And if you lose the device, it's persistently protected in hardware. So that's had really good adoption from those who have made the transition from either full disk encryption or file and folder, because it's really solving a pain point, which is system overhead problems and user complaints, IT expense, help desk issues. And so they look at that, and plus they get really good compliance reporting, which is kind of the legal problem that we've all had to deal with around encryption. So that's getting a life of its own. The vendor community is exploding, which is really interesting to watch right now. We're seeing the OEM market for drive manufacturers come to life to build Opal drives. It's not just the big 3 or 4. So we're kind of in the 7, 8, 9 range now, especially around solid state. So solid state market around self-encrypting drives for Opal standards is exploding right now, and it's really because the end user demand for fast, efficient, strong boot up time, and lightweight devices is causing that to happen. And we're also seeing the Opal standard start to migrate over to other flash memory devices. And so that transition is really causing adoption to happen in a lot of different areas, a lot of different device types. External media, USB drives, optical, other devices you carry around. And so that's been really great to see. TPM, this one's, just watch this, in my opinion. It's coming to life, and it's in a very positive way, because we've got push from some of the strong vendors in the community, and we've got adoption of TPM used for a lot of different things, not only what the OS components are, but we're seeing IT organizations in real time saying, we've got token problems that are really expensive to manage and handle, and we've got employee loss of those tokens. It's really becoming problematic. We need an alternative, because we have to lower our cost of managing our organization on an authentication perspective. And multi-factor authentication is here. We all know this. We watched the iPhone 5 announcement yesterday, which has an authentication device built into it, a fingerprint sensor. And that's not the only one. And so the multi-factor authentication, the ease of use of access to devices through other things is here, and we need to leverage something trustworthy. Otherwise, those are just nice convenience items. So there's a lot of transitions going on in the market right now that are causing adoption of these core capabilities that we're driving forward as an industry. Yes?
Yeah, if I may chime in on that. You know, when I come here, I listen, and if I didn't have a little bit of background of this, I would actually be depressed. Depressed in the sense that Stacy, I guess, used that famous sentence by how being disinclined to adopt this because what you said, it kind of implied, well, you know, it costs a little bit more, but it may not cost, but whenever they do then something on top, it costs more. And we have to wait for Windows 8 or wait for Windows 8.1, which is not true. We can do that today. Windows 7 just about everything the same way. Right? A huge installed base of platforms with Windows 7 where we can do exactly the same thing. And I think this is a message that needs to go out as well. Not just, you know, suppose that, everybody now we have to wait, we have to move to Windows 8.1 before we can actually do that. I think that's an important point.
That's true enough.
So to kind of keep...
It's not a cost, actually, like I jumped in, you bring up the COVID issue. You know, considering that in a large organization, they lose 30% of the total every year. They need to be replaced, they need to be fed to the first.
I just want to say, at one time before my current job, I was the product manager for RSA Secure ID, so I can say that all these facts that are flying around about how many tokens people lose every year is quite inflated, because I would have actually liked that. I would have been selling more, 30% more tokens. But there is a certain percentage, yes, absolutely true.
Yeah, so to your point, what I really like seeing, and this is, kind of marketing activities that we see in the market, is the Windows organization is pushing the adoption of solutions built on the TPM in Windows 8. Fabulous. We should all be applauding. Can you do the same thing in other operating systems? Yes, that's great. But getting that message out there by these large organizations is there are solutions that run on platforms built on these industry standards is a fabulous message to the market. The vendor community needs to go sell against that, right? And to your point, you can do it on Windows 7. Hallelujah. You can do logging your machine logs you and everything else. Virtual smart card, great solution. From an end user and enterprise perspective, the fact that I log in once to my device and it logs me into all the services I'm supposed to get, and my provisions and policies and all the things Stacy talked about the previous session, that makes the end user's life easier and gives the organization better security and control. Right? Those are great things for the market from an adoption perspective. That's a solution to a real problem. The users hate to log in. Stacy's talked about this for the past 7 years. I've seen him do it.
And we can take more questions too. And I want to just say that the goal of the panel is actually to be upbeat. In the end, I'd like to be all here optimistic about the future. So I would have failed if we all go depressed, believe me. But there is a point that where do you focus? And I think focus on the enterprises. Please adopt us. Please adopt us. Maybe that's the wrong focus with some exceptions. But you look at the chart. I tried to organize the enterprises. The problems they're trying to solve are: I want to communicate securely. I want to protect my data. I want to know what devices are on my network and what users are on my network. I want to make sure my transactions are secure. Those are the business problems that people are trying to solve. And we often talk here at a much lower level. And somewhere in between, there's all this great prep work that has to happen and has been happening. And then there's maybe a middle point where it's more of the solution providers that have to buy in and start to embed it, as you were saying.
But I hope it's only enterprise, right? Yeah. 2008, summer 2008, maybe even longer. And my laptop was available, but no laptop I got stolen. I happened to be connected to various different servers across the world, and one of the major actually to walk around today without dedicated drive, it's irresponsible.
Yeah.
And so anybody can do that, anybody can start it, and actually taking it to the enterprise.
Well, that's I agree, and that's why to me the darkest green, that's why it's there. And I personally, if there was a stock you could buy called self-encrypting drive Inc., I would probably invest in that personally right now. I think it's a home run, but I think what I'm trying to help us all do is talk about what's the next one and how can we make one like it. So it's my hope. Are there other questions or anyone feel? Go ahead.
How about GCG members? The kind of adoption is happening there.
Good question. I don't know how. Brian, you probably have the best position, or Stacy.
So you have two levels of adoption. You have one in the manufacturing and distribution of the technology as organizations buy in. So that's one level of adoption of they're in the organization, they're building products, they're distributing, and talking to their customers about it. The other is, are they using as end users themselves? So it's kind of two threads. And so from my day job perspective, there are TCG members and board members using the technology that I'm very aware of because we have relationships with them. On the other hand, some of the members we don't have relationships with from a business perspective, and I can't say. But as you talk to some of the board members that are here in the room or wandering around, ask them. I know, Steve Hanna has a self-encrypting drive on his laptop from Juniper. I know I do. I know Stacy probably does.
I have full disk encryption on mine. I don't have an SED yet.
You used to.
I used to, yes.
Your previous job.
You have to wear an A on your...
So there, that part of the ecosystem is adopting probably. It's taken longer than we all expected. Probably, probably part of your question, but they are doing it, and it's also part of their distribution to themselves as employees of how they deploy the technologies and determining what their current specs are. But we're also seeing demand start to occur inside those IT organizations of the TCG companies out to industry for adoption of technologies that has nothing to do with them as TCG members. Their IT organizations are seeking the technology out. And that's a really interesting phenomenon. It's not just our participation in these work groups and standards that's driving it. The shops that make decisions are saying, we see that this is a benefit to us.
How about as far as turning GCG adopt?
So I think GCG's made great strides to make that easier with some of the policies that we changed recently in 1.2 and in 2.0 around the opt-in enablement and disablement capabilities at the factory so that the OEMs can provide their customers with activated TPMs out of the factory so that they can take ownership and deploy them on a remote basis through remote tools. Has caused the adoption to be much better than it was in the early days, where we had some privacy-related policies put, kind of cast upon the organization based on conspiracy theories that we've all been reading about recently, which were unfounded, but it caused some policy to be put in place.
And I could just say, back to this chart, that from in 2012, the size of the TPM square, when we do surveys, it's a global footprint, or random companies that respond, but it's in the range of 20 to 25%. So we have deployed at least some TPMs, maybe, as I said, some of them is larger scale deployment, some of it's a project, but it's in that order of magnitude of 100 companies who respond, might be 20 to 25 who've got some kind of turned on TPM doing some kind of project. So that's an indicator for you have a question.
Eric, I'd like to get into your the wisdom you must have gained in creating this chart from 7 to 12. And looking at the decision makers, the people that make the decisions about buying these technologies, and I'll just generalize a little bit from self-encrypting drives to the idea of encrypting stored data. We have the world, the U.S. especially, and the world through the EU has a mandate through breach notification laws that you must encrypt data. Right, that's the the mandate for data breach notification is that if you breach data that's personal or sensitive, you've got to notify the public. And the Panel Institute and others have proven, dollar and cents wise, how much that will cost you on average if you have to breach notify. So companies are largely aware of that, but yet they're not encrypting stored data to 100%. So I'm just wondering, what do you see as the mindset of the decision maker that's buying not just SEDs? Because once I'm in the mind of the person that knows they have to encrypt stored data, then we can convince them that self-encryption is the best way to go. Why are they not adopting 100% encrypting stored data given the mandates they have?
Why isn't it 100% as the size of the field?
Exactly.
Because they're all less than 100%? Is that the question?
And it's not just self-encryption. I'm just looking at encrypting stored data, and then we'll take our appropriate piece of the pie from self-encryption.
Yeah, we had Joseph, Dr. Allen, in the previous panel, he raised some of the points that there's these so-called economic decisions that are made and analysis. Well, there's risk, right? And you have to decide: do I accept the risk? Do I ignore it? Which is the same as accepting it. Do I take some steps to mitigate it, which is what we are saying they should do, obviously, or do I try to assign it to somebody else? And a lot of folks, they don't want to spend the money. It's not the priority. They have other things to do.
And
they essentially accept the risk.
You find that a large part of the IT people or the CEO or whoever makes that decision are at least aware of the requirement?
Not always, but I think it's more aware. I think compliance is much more aware. It's become a board level. Here's a small thing. I hate to take up time of me speaking. I'm just supposed to be the moderator. But I was curious about this. So I looked at the SEC filings of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, right? There's 30 companies on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And there's a section there that's required in the U.S. Section 1A is called Risk Factors, or Management's Discussion of Risk. You can look it up yourself. And any publicly filed company has to submit these reports. And Section 1A is where they talk about risk. And I was looking specifically for, do they talk about risk to their data? And they high percentage, like 25 out of 30 of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, talked about risk to their data, to their customers' data, and that kind of thing. It was interesting. I think it was about 8 out of 30. This was last year, the most recent 2012 filings. Only 8 out of 30 talked about the risk to their intellectual property. And I guarantee you that companies like Caterpillar and Coke and Bank of America and others, they have intellectual property that they should be concerned about, but only 8 out of 30 of these marquee companies talked about it at that board level issue. And I also, by the way, looked at, they talked about the risk of outsourcing their infrastructure to third parties. So a lot of them talked about, hey, we're dependent on IT, it's really critical, if it should go down, we couldn't do operations. Almost all of them, like 25, 26 out of 30, mentioned that and the risk factors. But again, only maybe 8 or 10 of them talked about, hey, if we outsource that infrastructure to a third party, like cloud or whatever, that's a risk to our business too. And so it's coming. And, that's part of my answer to your question. What I can see even from a simple analysis like that is, it's becoming more of a board level awareness and being discussed actively. But gosh, if the top peer, the companies at the pinnacle of the pyramid, which the Dow Jones Industrial Average to me would represent, only talk about it to that degree, not 100%. Think about the companies down here lower in the pyramid and whether it's a board level issue for them. So there's still a lot of education and awareness to go. That would be my view as an analyst on that point.
So I have a lot of experience with encrypted data, and especially data at rest. There is a big risk with the balance between confidentiality, which is the goal of data at rest and encryption, and availability. One of the big problems with encrypting data is you need to manage keys. And so as a personal user, if you choose to use one of these things, you also need to manage the keys. And it's very easy to forget those passcodes. It's also very easy to not understand how to use tools that might try to automate those things. So even though technology might be readily available, it's a right click on a Windows panel, you might not be ready to know how to use it. And it's even, and if you look at it at the corporate level, although it's very important to try and keep intellectual property confidential, you can also just completely lose it. And I think Joseph Allen made a good list, and I think it's generally true. Availability trumps confidentiality. So that's very realistic. So when you go back to, how do you make these things more prolific? It is smarter tools. How can I make it such that I can guarantee that you aren't going to lose those keys? How can I give you a simple development model so an IT organization can adopt it? And so even though we work on these lower level protocols and key exchange, you still need to have some higher level protocols or just written down procedures on how to manage these things properly so you're not exposed to those availability risks.
That's a great point in the classic CIA triad, that all security people talk about. A is by far the one that trumps the confidentiality and integrity side. I thought there might be a question there, but thank you for coming. Other questions from the floor? We have 5 minutes or so left, and again, what we're trying to get to is this transition from enablement to adoption and use. I think we've touched on a lot of the things. Cost and business case is a factor, just general awareness is a factor, the ease of management and so on is an element of cost, not just the cost to acquire, but also the cost to manage ongoing. Transparency from an end user point of view.
You just mentioned, you take up the work of managing encryption. So you see, that appears to me, you're saying that's a big ability of technology. It's a way of people SCPs where we actually do not have to manage
you still
it's a very transparent TCP technology. And again, what I think is points that make it difficult to adopt. It is not. It's the simplest thing that we want to do in an organization.
For self-encrypted drives, it is somewhat transparent to the end user, but not to the IT organization. So the keys themselves, it's symmetric key based. There's someone who has to own that key and distribute it to an IT organization so that they can, if the user, they need to get access to corporate data. Managing those keys in a way where you balance out, well, if the whole idea of this thing is for me to protect the confidentiality of this drive, and I don't even have a good way of managing the keys that I can go out to my adversaries or my competition, then why did I even bother to begin with? And this is a realistic goal too. We see, especially in DoD, there's a lot of times where we have a program and you're managing different levels of information. A lot of times people might say, well, let's encrypt the data because this is a good thing to do. Then you find, well, when we do that, all of a sudden we got to get key management involved, and then we have these different authorities that are involved. And if someone wanted to just take a hard drive out of a ship and give it to somebody, they might not be able to get that information. So a lot of times these things start getting dialed back with all these ideas of wanting to use encryption. All of a sudden, just say it's not worth it. I have a higher risk of losing the data or never being able to see the data that I need than the confidentiality that I was trying to get out of it.
So I think, we're in a transition between the understanding of where encryption has been versus where encryption is going, and the tools that have been developed to manage things like self-encrypting drives and or full disk encryption of the past. You're in that transition because, organizations that have deployed self-encrypting drives under full enterprise management are seeing the joy and benefit of ease of use. Whereas transacting that or transitioning that into a DoD environment, which is much more complex from a use case perspective, is not the same as what we talk about in broad enterprise. And so I wanted to kind of clarify a little bit because we're not an apples and apples conversation. It's an apples and oranges conversation on how encryption is deployed in different marketplaces.
In fact, that's an opportunity for the business case that we all talk about. So you can compare the cost of doing things, the way that people know currently to the way that's enabled by what we have here. And if you can do it much more cheaply, you might just lower the threshold enough where the people will jump over as we see in the data.
Absolutely. So those use cases will get kind of vetted, and the technology will get adopted, and a lot of the infrastructure providers will start to look at ways to manage them. And I think you'll see that transition happen because we're seeing procurement happen within government, demanding industry standard security components that have the TCG brand on them. And so that transition will happen.
Let me try another stupid analogy, but I think back to high school chemistry, and one of the things I remember, probably I forgot a lot more than I remember, but sometimes you can get all the elements for some reaction together, but nothing happens unless you apply a lot of heat and light. That's what makes everything happen. So I guess the question is, where do we need the heat and light? And are we applying it as individuals in our own companies and our day jobs, and as the organizations like TCG and others, where's the heat and light needed the most, and how can we go away from here and start to do that? Yes, sir?
The other thing is pressure.
Pressure, yeah, that's it. So let's say heat and light pressure all mean the same thing in this case. Where can we apply the pressure to make this happen?
Well, oddly enough, this is where governments can help.
Yeah.
The success of full drive encryption and SEDs in the market right now largely go back to compliance requirements placed by the government. So data breach laws, 48 of them at a state level in the United States. Nationally, there's Bramley-Bliley in finance and HIPAA in healthcare. Internationally, there are lots of standards that require encryption of data at rest. It's one of the things that made BitLocker so popular. BitLocker uses a PPM. It makes full disk encryption of all sorts popular, including SEDs. So, is it a good thing to do? Yeah, I think the protection of data at rest is a good thing to do. Who made us do it? Uncle Sam, so to speak. Well, metaphorically, the government made us do it. So, compliance can be the pressure to drive a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Yeah, definitely Uncle Sam for sure. I mean, we just got that statement from Deborah Plunkett. Right? Right away when someone says something like that, yep, I need to support TPM. No doubt about it. Other types of compliance, though, it's just these simple terms and
Well, that's
conditions.
almost him as a buyer and a different kind of compliance.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a legal agreement. Terms and conditions. If the government wants to purchase this, it needs to be compliant with these regulations. Same with service providers. Netflix requires some sort of level of protection in the device, and users need Netflix. Then boom, there you go, a way to enforce the mechanism. So those are good things. But it's also very important that you enforce it in a way that's actually usable, right? So people will fight it. As an operating system vendor, I will fight it if I find out I'm forced to do something that actually makes the problem worse, right? So that's very important as well. I did want to make a comment too about apples and oranges in comparison. I didn't say that self-encrypting drives are not practical to be used. What needs to be done is there needs to be tools to make them practical to use, right? You do need to do key management. The thing is, key management is difficult. You do need mechanisms to make it even simpler to match up with the user models of the organization. It's very geeky science, at this level when you're talking about cryptography. And it's very hard for someone who manages Microsoft devices and Cisco devices to understand the intricacies of cryptography. You need to abstract those things and make those models simpler. That's a simple solution to that problem.
Okay. Brian, you get the last word because we're right at the end of our question.
Yeah, so just 2 seconds. I think the consumer has a voice in the pressure or heat here. And consumers are starting to get products that have TCG technologies built into them. And they'll start to see the benefit of protecting their identity, protecting their assets, protecting their data. And they're going to have a strong voice in the demand side to start to create activity. We've been pushing as an organization, as an industry, into the commercial enterprise, into the government agencies, and fulfilling their requests. And that was really the early adopter model, that the consumer is going to get the benefit of all of our hard work as this technology simplifies, and they're going to demand it. And TCG has to take a role in that consumer message.
All right, and we have to, again, run out because of time. We have to stop. Sasha is about to tell us about lunch, which is next.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your punctuality. We already hate to be late for lunch. It's served in the exhibit hall, and we will be starting again in 1 hour at 1:30 with track sessions. So we will have one here in the exhibit hall and upstairs in Salon 18. Thanks.
Thank you.